Hey there, everyone. It's Jody Sutter of the Sutter Company. It's Just Ask Jody Live. It's that time where I go live monthly with with a guest of honor, and we talk about an issue that addresses common struggles, common challenges around agency business development. So, in a few minutes, I will be introducing a very good friend of mine and one of the best legal experts in the agency business, Sharon Toerek, and we're going to talk specifically about the legal mistakes that most agencies make in a pitch situation. So it's something we've done together before, and she and I always have super productive conversations, and I think it's going to be valuable to you. So before I welcome her on, though, I just wanted to mention to everyone that I will be offering a masterclass. It's a new masterclass. These are things that I've been starting to do more recently. I just wanted to let you know that this new masterclass is called Prospecting with Purpose. And it's going to happen at the end of the first class is like April 24th. So it's 3 hour-long sessions, 3 weeks in a row, April 24th, May 1st, and May 9th. And you can put your phone up to that little QR code there, and you'll go right to our landing page. We'll also make sure to put the landing page URL into the comments below, and I'd love to have you join us. Right now, it's an early bird special, so $395 per person for attending. The price is going to go up in a couple of weeks, but take advantage now of the early bird pricing. And let me know if you got any questions, and I really hope to see you there. Oh, also, by the way, I'm limiting it to 25 people because I want it to be a productive and intimate environment where we actually get stuff done. So, Prospecting with Purpose, April 24th, May 1st, May 9th. Those are 3 1-hour-long masterclass sessions, and we're going to help you take control of your new business destiny. All right, so let's get on with our live stream today. So, as I said, today I have Sharon Toerek as my guest, and Sharon is the owner of a law firm that specializes in working with agencies, most of them small agencies, around all manner of legal issues, especially new ones that you agency owners are probably wondering how to deal with, like AI. But she also deals with a lot of stuff that bears on agency new business, ownership of work, how to negotiate the contracts, and we're going to be talking a lot about that. And I will just say that Sharon is in an area that may or may not be nice to her as far as internet connectivity. So, Sharon, thank you for being here. We're keeping our fingers crossed that
Hello, my
everything's
friend. Yes, I have my fingers crossed, both of them. I'm underneath the camera lens to make sure that we stick with it through the whole session. It's good to be here,
yeah.
Jody. Thanks for having
That's,
me.
oh, thank you so much. And I've been a guest of yours on your podcast, so it's nice to be finally able to reciprocate that. And by the way, Sharon has got an amazing podcast and lots of great free resources. So one of the things we'll also do is we'll include that information as well in the show notes. So, Sharon, let's talk about the legal mistakes or the legal mishaps that a lot of agencies tend to make when it comes to new business. And like I said, it's a topic that you and I have spoken about before, but it's been a couple of years. Um, what what's new, and what are the new mistakes that agencies are making when it comes to new business or almost any legal mistakes?
Yeah, I think we've been sort of transfixed by the issue of how AI is going to impact the work that we do, the deliverables we create. For the clients who were signing up and the projects that we're onboarding for existing clients. And so that has increasingly become a new business issue because, and Jody knows this about me, I love to think about things in sets of three. And so when it comes to AI adoption and using it to create your deliverables, it's all about conversations, it's all about policy, but it's also about contract language. And increasingly, we are seeing the need to have the critical conversations with your clients or your prospects so that in the contracts, AI created deliverables or AI influenced deliverables are addressed. Things like, IP ownership of the end product, things like liability for whatever the deliverables look like. And so that's a relatively new discussion that agencies need to be having that's new business related. Otherwise, I gotta tell you, the fundamentals don't change much in terms of the way agencies approach, the new business discussion as reflected in the contract that they ultimately sign with the client. It is still a lot about making sure you're discussing, the critical issues related to the scope of work first
Yeah.
before you actually get to legal terms. Let's start there. That what I say that I think is the most critical thing because I see a lot of agencies trying to jam in, the dollars, the deadlines, the deliverables into the actual master service agreement when they're really better left to a statement of work document that sort of is integrated with the MSA.
That's interesting. So, and by the way, I also want to say for folks who are live with us today, please do submit your questions for Sharon. So, essentially, this is your opportunity to get some free legal advice. So, take
Yep,
advantage of it.
I love it.
So,
Free
Sharon,
therapy.
what you're saying is that so agencies are the ones that want to include the scope of work language in the contract, not the marketers.
I don't think it's necessarily a want. I think it is just
Mm,
necessarily a habit that
mm,
maybe the industry has fallen into, in terms of wanting first of all, agencies are, in my view, and based on our experience at my firm, always in a hurry to get the agreement papered because at that point, you've already decided that you and the client are going to get married, at least for
yeah,
this project or for a longer term scope of work. And so you want the signature on the line that is dotted as soon as possible. So for a couple of reasons, you want to cement the relationship, you want to start that retainer income. I get it. And
mm,
so I think that's part of it, the sort of the rush and the excitement to get the thing started officially.
yeah.
Um, and I also think it's, just agencies are uh, well experienced in sort of patching together different sets of language and agreement templates and
Mm,
that come from different places and that don't always mesh together or don't always evolve as the agency evolves. And so I think that's part of it
interesting.
too. And so everything just gets thrown in. Yet at the same time, agencies don't want contracts to be too long. We hear that a lot too. So the
Yeah.
goals are a bit in conflict with each other. But I would say just, as a basic tenet, figure out your scope of work first and try to write that SOW, whether on paper, at least as an outline, so that you have it as you are drafting or reviewing your master service agreement. Because there may be things in the contract that are not relevant based on the scope of work you're going to be engaged with for
Yeah.
that client.
So I mean, I've got a couple of things about the scope of work, but one of the things you just touched on there is the stuff in the contract that's not relevant. And I find this also happens when it's the client who is dictating the master services agreement, the client saying, yes, use our language. And how frequently do you see agencies kind of rolling over and saying, okay, well, the client says we have to use their language, so I guess we have to use their language, even though either we don't really understand it or it's not
Mhm.
really in our favor. How
Yeah.
often do you find agencies, how often do they challenge that? And should they?
I not always, not
Mm,
always.
yeah.
I think you have to determine what are your hills worth dying on when it comes
Mhm.
to, and this is where again having your scope of work thought out first will help you because if you're dealing with say an enterprise size client or a government agency or anywhere where they insist on using their paperwork or maybe they're also layering a procurement process on top of
Mm,
legal, um, so they insist on using their versions of the agreements. They're going to be using the same agreements with your agency as they're going to be using with a consulting firm or a software developer.
an equipment manufacturer, yeah.
Totally. Totally. So
Mm,
there's going to be stuff in there about the types of insurance that are absolutely not relevant to the work an agency would do. There are going to be policy limits that may be extraordinary for the type of risk that is involved in the
yeah.
project that you're engaged in. Um, there may be IP provisions in there, IP ownership provisions that are completely unfair to the agency, or that don't time the transfer of the IP, appropriately. So I think it matters what the scope of work is, because then you can make quick work of scissoring away the stuff in the agreement that just simply doesn't apply, and that you can either ask be removed, or that you may agree to, because it will never touch the work that you do, or the risk that you assume in the work that you're engaged with.
So that's interesting that what you just said. So either scissor it away because it's not relevant and it could potentially hurt you, like if you have to carry all this extra insurance, we don't really, neither of you need it.
Right.
But there are times where you might look at language and say this is not relevant, but it's also not risky, and it's not worth asking the client to remove it because we just want to be easy to do business with. Is that what you're saying? That sometimes you just
I am
leave it in
saying that.
because
I mean, yeah, it's great to be a purist when it comes to the legal team reviewing the agreement,
yeah.
and we advocate hard for agencies, but at some point, sometimes there are provisions in an agreement that the client may have as its standard practice that simply are not going to be a risk for you. And in some cases, you might accept the risk of leaving them in there because they don't really relate to. Now, you've got to be careful that as your work expands for that client, that you don't
Yes.
intentionally then dip into that area of risk. So it's not a one size fits all. And by no means am I advising. Actually, none of this is advice. I should have said that at the beginning. But no,
So
by
when I
no
said
means.
free legal advice, you're right. It's like it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it
Unless
is some free thoughts
it's
from a
right.
legal expert.
Yeah, it's education. But yeah, I mean, in some cases, uh, you're not assuming that much risk, or you're not assuming risk that outweighs the benefits of getting
Yeah.
the deal done quickly. So there's as much business judgment that has to be applied as legal judgment in some of these new business situations when you're trying to get the contract done. Now I see it swing the other way too, where they're in such a hurry that they'll agree to things they shouldn't be agreeing to, and that they're not thinking through to their logical
Yeah.
conclusion.
So let's talk about that a bit, because that is something that's also a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So they'll either just sign an agreement that maybe is not really in their favor, or even worse, starting work without the agreement. So what
Yeah.
I've seen, and I've probably fell prey to it myself when I was really young and under pressure to close the deal, is this I'm under pressure to close a deal,
Yeah.
and I don't want to appear to be hard to do business with, and I want the clients to like us, and I don't want them to go and choose the second runner up.
Hmm.
And I've just realized that that's ridiculous. So I feel like you are never in a stronger position than when the client has verbally said yes and before you sign the contract. What are your
100%.
thoughts?
100%. You're and you are underestimating your leverage at this point in the
Yeah.
game. You will never be in a stronger position. And remember, if you're an agency that routinely signs agreements that the brand puts forward to you, they've had no hesitation whatsoever about shoving their version of an NDA across the table at you before you've had the conversations, their master service agreement. And so this is an arm's length transaction, no matter what your size. I don't
Yeah.
care if they're David and you're Goliath. They've decided to engage you. And so you need to make sure that you're coming to the table as an equal bargaining partner, because that will also set the table for how they evaluate your decision making down the line throughout the engagement. When there's a change in scope of the work, when there are
Yeah.
change orders to be made, when there's new projects to be done. So I agree, Jody. It's don't underestimate your leverage. Um,
Yeah.
don't draw things out that don't need to be drawn out, but come to the table negotiating on the points that are critical for you,
Yeah.
and take a sort of cooler look at the provisions that are, as I said, are not what I call hills to die on for the deal
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've ever, and anyone who's live today or anyone's watching the recording, I would love to hear from folks, and Sharon, whether maybe I've never run into a situation where a agency did not get a piece of business that the client said, yeah, where the client gave a verbal okay, and then
Right.
pulled it because the agency was standing up for itself too firmly in the contract negotiations. I've never heard of that happening because
Right.
they've put the client has invested a huge amount in this process
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, if they've decided you're the one, they're loath to turn around and have to start all over again or start partway again with a new bidder.
I will say this, if you're an agency seeking to work with a brand that has brought, legal and procurement to the table, for example,
Mm,
um, you are best served by making sure that your marketing counterpart at the client is involved and in the loop at all times on the contract
yeah,
discussions, because there are times when procurement and or legal will advocate for positions, and they may be advocating the same position for completely different reasons, which is another
yeah,
topic for another day. But it's also frequently the case they're not talking to each other at all. And so things that legal is insisting upon, marketing doesn't care about. And marketing is really
right.
your end client in the transaction. So make sure you involve them. They can really kind of grease the wheels in terms of making the negotiation go more promptly, more smoothly, so that you can get started sooner.
Yeah,
Um, and there are times I have seen things where surprises arise, and it's in the areas typically of um, exclusivity requests, for example, where you've got to take some time to bat that back and forth between the client who's asking for it and the agency who maybe hasn't expected that request because it's not something that you talk about during the pitch phase or the conversation phase of the relationship, or IP ownership,
yeah.
licensing versus outright ownership of the end product, that kind of thing.
So those are two really important issues. Exclusivity, because I think the other thing that I focus on when I talk to my client about these legal issues is that something like the exclusivity clauses that you negotiate
Mhm.
will affect how you pitch business to other clients. I think that's something we forget about. Like how well I negotiate this contract may actually hamper me in pitching other clients. So
Mhm.
exclusivity, like if you work with Coca-Cola, they're not going to want you to work with Pepsi, right? That kind
Yeah.
of thing. And
Yeah,
how?
it's a double-edged sword for agencies that have a very well-defined niche, right? Which is
Yes.
approach that an approach I advocate for. We certainly take it in my firm. We work with agencies. That's obviously a niche, but it does have a double-edged um,
Yeah.
sharpness to it, in that the more entrenched you get in a vertical, for example, let's use your example of soda.
Yeah.
Um, the more entrenched you get, the more popular your services are and the more sought out in the category where you're a
Mhm.
specialist. And so they tend to start to want you for themselves. And that limits your opportunities as an agency.
Yeah.
So I have sort of my initial knee jerk reaction, and on behalf of clients, is no, we're not agreeing to any exclusivity. And then sometimes you have to very quickly back away from that and say, all right, we might agree if it makes business sense to certain kinds of exclusivity, but let's talk about how we're going to limit that. We're going to limit it either to product categories or to companies, specific companies, or specific geographies, and then we work with our clients to define as many limitations and
Right.
cutbacks as we can to that exclusivity to make it livable.
So you're bringing up another, I think, very important issue is, which is kind of the basics of negotiation. And what I think that for some of us, negotiating a contract is sort of a scary thing. It's taking us outside of our comfort zone. But what you're saying, like basic negotiation principles say, like one of you starts here, the other of you starts there, and you want to get to a point of compromise. And so
Mhm,
this idea, number one, of if you see a clause that would potentially hurt you, to not be afraid to address it and say, this
mhm,
is unreasonable and here's why. And then also to be able to say, but like, where are you we're asking the client where they're willing to give concessions, and the agency thinking about, like, again, the Coke Pepsi thing, maybe if you really, I mean, sometimes I'm a big believer in asking why. Why is this important to you?
I was just
And then
gonna say
sometimes,
that exact same thing. I
go ahead.
100%. I think if you approach it from a position of curiosity, tell me why that's important to the company.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about confidentiality, about having product planning information, revealed? Are you concerned that the strategies we're going to bring are not original enough because we also work for potential competitors in this space? Where are your concerns coming from? Let's talk
Yeah.
about those. And then let's see if there's practical ways we can craft the exclusivity request in the agreement, if we're going to agree to it at all under any
Yeah.
terms, in a way that's livable for both of us. And then let's look at things like, how long does this exclusivity need to last? And because those are ways that you can carve back those requests as well.
Yeah. Something else I learned a long time ago, and it was so helpful, that every single clause in a contract can probably be tied back to a business issue. I remember thinking like, oh, everything in this, when I used to negotiate for a design agency that I was running business development for, and I realized like, oh yeah, this is not like legal language just for the sake of legal language. This is here because we were screwed 5 years ago by that client. And so we added this clause in, or the client was screwed by the agency. And so they added this clause in. And as long as you understand that it's a business issue, and then, as you say, with some smart questioning, why is it in there? Help me understand this. It helps you really get to a compromise. And then you can have a conversation. Now, what's interesting, you were saying before too, about bringing legal and procurement, because legal and procurement do not have really a whole lot of skin in this game. They want to keep their contract as tight as possible, and they want to save as much money as possible, if you're depending on whether you're legal or procurement.
Yeah.
So this is kind of going back a little bit, but I think that's also where having that the marketer involved, having your direct client contact involved is really helpful, because then they can sometimes translate as well. Do you find that that's helpful?
100%. Yeah, they are the ones who are going to see what the true business issues are. Hopefully your marketing counterpart has some juice or enough leverage to say to legal and to procurement, I know that's our standard, but it's not necessary here, or we're waiving that there, or it's not applicable. And remember that in any, what I would call, three-party negotiation, you and then marketing, procurement, legal on the other side, if that's your situation, procurement's incentivized to get the best price possible. So if they maybe, let's pick exclusivity as a particular area of the contract we're talking about. Marketing's concerned because of the obvious competitive considerations that could be at play. Procurement wants to use that as a wedge to get preferred pricing out of you, because you need to be pricing at a premium if you're going to be giving them exclusivity. That's another topic for another, probably just ask Jody. And then legal wants to make sure that there's no IP being exposed and that there's no risk being assumed. And so you're all talking about the same clause, and everybody's got different incentives for getting the result that they want. So just know that going in, and understand that they might all be talking about the same provision in a contract for different reasons. And absolutely having them around the same table, virtually or otherwise, is important. I've negotiated contracts on behalf of agency clients where it was clear that once we got them on a Zoom call together, they had never even spoken to each other about this agreement. So nobody was talking to anybody at the client. And once we had the opportunity to do that, the deal got done much more quickly. And it wasn't because I'm any, magician. It was because they just weren't talking to each other, and things were going in circles. And this is the way it works in large enterprises.
I was wondering how often you find, how often do you come into the situation where the marketing person kind of just doesn't even want to get involved? and just leaves the agency to procurement and legal, or maybe that's
Sometimes.
also a sign of a bad client as well.
I think, well, I don't know if it's a sign of a bad or a good client. I do think it's a
Mm,
sign of perhaps your counterparts' leverage within their organization, which can tell
yeah,
you something about their ability to get budgets approved. It can tell you something about their ability to get particular
yeah,
creative concepts accepted and
yeah,
run up the flagpole. So, you know, I mean, use your business judgment as an agency leader as you're negotiating to try to figure out what that means and why. But yeah, if they're not getting anybody on their multi-party team in line, then that's a sign, I think, of lack of leverage,
yeah.
to some degree.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also, right, I always think of looking at the implied needs, the implied messages that you read or in the RFP or hear in the client conversations. That is an implied message that also says, going in with eyes wide open, I'm on my own negotiating with procurement and legal. And this also maybe means that when I need to stand up for my agency, myself and my agency, this client may not be the best at it. So going into it, really understanding that. I also wanted to go
Mm,
back quickly about finding common ground and negotiating what's important and letting go what's not. You're talking about what's valuable to the
mhm.
party. So exclusivity might be really valuable to your client, and you discover that by asking them why, what are their chief concerns, why are they concerns, and then you say, okay, we get it, so that's a value to you, Mr. and Ms. Client. And
Mhm.
so if it's a value to them, theoretically you should be able to say, well, in order for us, for our business to stay healthy and thriving, we need to have some value on our end, which would be a higher rate, or we need to increase our fees because it means we can't go work for Pepsi because we're working for you, Coca-Cola.
Yeah,
I think agencies can quite
it's either a premium fee, and probably should
mm,
be a combination of
yeah,
a premium fee, a minimum spend,
yeah,
or a minimum contract duration. So
yes,
multi-year minimum spend, because and that has its pros and cons too, because you may want to get out sooner rather than later
sure,
in some cases. So proceed at your own risk, but definitely premium pricing should be presumed in any exclusivity situation if the agency is going to entertain it,
yeah,
um, because you are limiting your options for selling business out there in the market and what you have defined as your niche. So
yes.
um, definitely a minimum spend in addition, because you need to replace that other potential revenue that you're foreclosing.
I think agencies might also push back on this, and they're like, how can I charge them more? They've been telling me that their budget is only this. And
Yeah.
so I often say, when you get to the legal negotiation, the master services agreement, it so actually, let me rephrase this. Earlier on in the RFP process, if you're answering RFPs, there's often a question that goes something like, or a series of questions that go something like, tell us about your employee turnover, tell us about your client turnover, who's your largest client, who's your smallest client, what's the average tenure. And what I tell my agency clients is like, look, all those questions are basically asking, how stable is your business?
Mhm.
If we sign up for you, if we sign a year-long contract with you, and you've given us all these ideas that we love, is your business strong enough to actually deliver them? And so this is also where I say, here's where we have to turn that back to them and say, by asking us for exclusivity without being able to charge a premium for it, you are compromising the strength of our business, which in the end hurts you, the
Yeah.
marketer. And
Yeah.
I think that's rarely an argument that's used.
Yeah, I mean, I am not a pricing expert for agencies. I have my own point of view on it, particularly vis-a-vis the
Yeah.
exclusivity issue. But um, I think that this points to, this ends up being sort of a circular discussion, but this points to the importance of really having um, the scope of your relationship as well defined as you possibly
Yeah.
can before you think about reviewing, evaluate, or preparing the legal terms of the agreement, because
Yes.
they have to support the things that matter to the parties the most, in this case, the
Yeah.
agency. And if you want to be efficient with your time and your treasure, right, in terms of the contract
Yeah.
negotiation, you sort of have to know where those priorities are going to lie to be, to get the best value out of the experience.
Yeah.
From your legal counsel, from your pricing experts, whomever you're bringing in to help you put the deal together.
Yeah. Yeah. Sharon, this always happens. We're at the 30-minute past the hour mark, and I feel
Okay.
like we just started talking. So I think it's interesting. We've kind of focused in on the master services agreement and where you should stay strong and where you might want to allow some leeway. Gosh, but we didn't even get to, I mean, some of the things that you and I have talked about before in this situation have been like also the NDAs. We touched on that briefly, but I think we didn't even
Yeah.
talk about NDAs. We didn't even talk about spec work and some legal issues around that. So I
No,
think we might need you to have you come back so we could talk about
I
some
will
of all
be
these other
happy to
things.
do that for you anytime. I always love
Yeah.
talking new business with
Yeah.
you, Jody.
Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you think is really important vis-a-vis this conversation that folks should know before we sign off?
One thing, I want agencies to be having the AI conversation with their clients before the clients bring it up.
Okay.
Start asking good questions about, do they have company policies around it? What's their expectation around using
Yeah.
it, et cetera? Start weaving it into your new business discussions to sort of defray the surprise down the line.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
And so, Sharon, as I said, we will put in the comments below a link to your website and a link to your awesome podcast. Where, by the way, and it's not just legal. Your podcast, the Innovative Agency, it's not just about legal stuff.
It's not legal at
Sharon
all.
has, oh my
Not
gosh, you have
legal at
so
all.
many fantastic, talented people who have all sorts of perspectives on how to run an agency. So, yeah,
Oh,
I hope that everyone will sign up and subscribe to
thanks,
that.
Jody.
And thank you. I will, we'll get you back on so we can talk about more exciting legal stuff and how agencies can master it.
Really fun to be with you here today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.